Peace be to you. Into the problem of evil. Let us begin with the question.
Kia ora, now my head of mind to another episode of Curiously Catholic, the Evangelion podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Brendan Malone about the 2024 Olympics, how it depicts the Last Supper, how we should react as Catholics, and all sorts of fun in between. So, stay tuned to listen to all that, but also like, share, subscribe, get involved with the mission of Evangelion. We're on YouTube. I'm trying out all the new shorts. It's going pretty good, I think. So subscribe on there. Click the bell so you get all the notifications. Also check out our Instagram. I'm trying to work on posting more on there. And of course, we're on Spotify and all podcasting apps. So like, share, subscribe, and follow all that we're doing with Evangelion. Now, without further ado, let's talk to Brendan Malone. Okay. Kia ora, Brendan. How's it going, mate?
It's great. Very good to be with you. I was just looking in the wrong direction there. Suddenly remembered right camera to look into. It's good. Great. Long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a while. What have you been up to?
That is a very interesting question. And I could be facetious like typical dad joke style and say, well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. But I won't. I'll just say it's been really busy. A lot of travel, a lot of speaking around Australia and New Zealand. Obviously the usual podcasting and stuff like that as well. Pretty busy period right now, probably until the end of October before it goes back to normal again.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like it's been as chaotic in the world as it has been for you. There's been a lot going on recently. So, I mean, I think we should just dive straight in, really. As I'm sure people watching are fully aware, recently the Olympics has started, and I think ultimately the Olympics on the whole is a pretty good thing. What do you reckon?
I think kind of. And it's something interesting that I've been contemplating a bit lately, and this is really from the fullness of Catholic social doctrine. There's something interesting going on with the Olympics, as I understand it, and I think it does need to be addressed. And what that is that you've a group of people attached. A massive global sporting event, and they are making a lot of money off the back of this event. It's a very big, lucrative venture. However, the athletes don't get paid a cent. And so there's something sort of interesting in all of that, and there's these interesting questions about it. And now you've also got other things like there's a controversy erupting right now as we record about the inclusion of men in women's sport, particularly two men in the boxing, and it's just what's happened this morning is just not good at all. And so there are some issues there, but I think in principle, if you could sort those out, then the Olympics would be probably the last truly global sort of community of fraternity that we have really in the world. And that's quite that's something important about that.
Yeah, because I think, so like as a concept, the idea of like aiming for excellence and seeking out to be the best version of yourself, you could see lots of virtues in that, like chastity, temperance, fortitude. So yeah, I think it's always good to be have that physical greatness as well as spiritual greatness. I think the two come together pretty well. There's probably some sort of theology of the body reference there. But I think as a whole it's a good thing, and I think there has been a lot of good that's coming out of the Olympics as well. Sporting achievements, New Zealand's won a few golds and stuff, but then there's also some really beautiful things like mothers that have taken their children and they're still breastfeeding even though they're competing, and I think that's such a beautiful like pro-life message and just a real life message. You don't have to put any politics or any ideologies on it. It's just beautiful. And there was this clip recently I saw which it made me kind of proud to be in kind of Oceania, where the Fijian team were all just singing praise and worship and everyone was just awestruck at how amazing their voices were, and I was like, mate, that's commonplace in Aotearoa, mate. Americans being gobsmacked by it. It's like, gosh, it's a lot of good things that are coming out of it. But I guess the world we live in is changing a lot of things. And I have heard a lot of commentary just from like secular influences, people like Joe Rogan talking about how, yeah, the Olympics is not feeding the people that are making people make the money. You know, it's all turned into something a bit ridiculous. Hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into making this event, and then we have, getting onto the opening ceremony. Well, I mean, what was that?
That's the question of the day, isn't it? Like, what was that? It's so astounding because it was, I think, the best way, before we even get into anything else I know you want to talk about today, the religious implications of what we saw. The simple fact is that this was a hedonistic display of debasement, even if you are someone who isn't a person of faith and doesn't see any religious symbolism in it. Still was a hedonistic debasement, and it also saw a subversive political ideology basically hijack the games and make it all about themselves. It wasn't about sports and greatness and achievement. It was all about politics.
Yeah, because that was my initial reaction. I spared myself the penance of watching the opening ceremony. I saw a few clips and thought, that's enough, thank you very much. I won't look any further into that. I actually tried looking it up before this episode to be like, I should probably watch it, and it's just nowhere to be found anymore, thank God. But yeah,
and by the way, the fact that they have scrubbed the historical record, if you might say, it might come back well after the Olympics, but the fact that they have actually got rid of the footage is quite an important and telling thing. It really does undermine the narrative that some people are trying to claim. Oh, no, there was nothing. This was just innocent. There was no ideological politics here. There was nothing religious. I think if that had truly been the case, there would have been no need to remove the footage. It would still be there. Yeah.
My favorite quote on describing the opening ceremony was from Bishop Barron. It's calling it a masterpiece of woke duplicity. I think that was referring to the apology actually afterwards, and I just thought it's a great combination of words, and it actually kind of sums up everything that's happened recently. I think we kind of are people don't like the word woke anymore. People don't like it's kind of gone a bit boring now, and nobody likes it. But it is still a reality of what's happening. We're not looking at anything specific. We're looking at an ideology. We're looking at something that's trying to be pushed, and it is this wokeism, where people are trying to make the minority the majority, even if they're not.
Well, I think too, I think there is a valid criticism that some would make. I'm like regular listeners to my podcast or my public presentations will know that I try and really delve into the various ideologies and philosophies that really underpin what we call wokeism. So I think it is valid to use, you're right, that term. The thing we should be careful of is that it doesn't become like political correctness, where people just say, oh, that's politically correct about everything. And they never really get precise enough to say, well, what do you mean? It becomes a bit of a convenient catch-all. And the danger when you're doing that is you just end up labeling people and not really engaging seriously with them in charity or their ideas, the ideologies behind it all. But you are right at the same time. It is a very good umbrella term that is instantly knowable and recognizable to describe a particular set of ideological beliefs that have come out of liberalism and tend to be a bit more Marxist in nature and are really grounded in what we would call identitarian or identity politics, where you group people in various identities and then effectively pit them at a sort of oppression war with each other. Some are victims and some are oppressors and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, getting into it, what do you think of the Feast of Dionysus that they were trying to put out there, apparently?
Well, here's what I'd say. I would say that this is important to understand that this is both, first of all, it's a visual depiction. So there's more than just one thing happening, which is very interesting because the way some people are talking about it, particularly those trying to defend it, is they're talking about it like it was a single static image. That's not correct. It is a performance, and it was a wide-ranging performance, and there were lots of different imageries and symbolisms that were used. That's number one. And so what that means is you've got more than just one thing happening here. So people need to remember that point. Number two is in art, this is art, it's not engineering. In art, there is layers. There are layers always in art. And a good artist like Thomas Joly, and I've actually bothered to read the guy's personal resume, and it is impressive. I've also seen images of him, for example, in his presentation of King Richard III by Shakespeare, where he has, and it might even be him, I think, in the photo, but it's an image of what looks like a scarecrow-type character. It looks like Robert Smith from The Cure when he was a bit younger and thinner, draped over a Christian cross, like this. Now, so what that tells me is this guy does push boundaries and he's not afraid to use religious iconography in a subversive way in his art. So, he is a pedigreed artist who understands and knows that in the modern art sense, I don't think this is actually good or true, but in the modern art sense, you are trained to believe that subversion is this great good of art, and that it's not about using beauty and about your artisanship to create beautiful things that draw people deeper into goodness and truth. It's about subversion and political messaging. And like Karl Marx in particular, he referred to artists as the conscience of society. And there's this big emphasis on using art in a subversive way. And so you've got a guy who's trained in this school of art, who has got real good pedigree here, who clearly has shown form previously. He knows and understands subversion and breaking taboos and boundaries. And then people sort of turning around and saying, oh, no, well, it wasn't really anything to do with the Last Supper. I'd say, look, I don't think that's actually paying the guy enough respect for what he's done here and how art actually works. Like I said, it's not like engineering. When you engineer a bridge and you see triangles, there's no deeper theological or philosophical meaning there. There's no layering. They use a triangle because it's the strongest shape. They don't use it because it's the strongest shape. And also there's an interesting three-way philosophical question about the good of driving to work to feed your family, but also pollution, and also the morality of capitalism and the hierarchy of wealth over poverty. No, nothing like that is going on. It's just literally a triangle. That's engineering. But art is not that. And I think the one big thing I'd say too is that perhaps those who might be tempted to doubt, you don't even need to really get into any of the deeper evidence here. And by the way, after I'm finished with you, I'm going to be recording a podcast on this very issue, just going through the whole thing and basically loosely laying it out like a court case, all of the evidence, and lots of it that people haven't even talked about publicly yet, to make the case for why I think there was some subversion here. One of the things that you realize is that before you even get into any of that kind of evidence, and that podcast is probably going to be a longer one because of all the evidence, in actual fact, the imagery, the iconography was so instantly recognizable that everyone globally, whether they're Christians or non-Christians, whether they darkened the doorway of a church ever in their lives, whether they were faithful believers every Sunday going to church, what did everyone see when they saw that image? They instantly it was so recognizable they could name it. Yeah. And to sort of dismiss that and say, oh no, that doesn't mean anything. This is not just a group of Christians who said, oh look, we think, this is the Last Supper, and no one else sees it. And it's not some sort of back corner internet conspiracy where someone goes, look, if I draw a triangle here and a square here and and I change this color, it makes, see, look, can you see it now? No, you don't even have to have it explained to you. You just see it. That's how clear it is to me that this particular performance did include earlier on a depiction. And by the way, this is an important fact. 45 minutes before Dionysus even enters the performance, that image of the Last Supper appears. Yeah,
I've had a lot of people, even that I know that are, like I'd say, oh, they're pretty smart, they're pretty onto it, and they've been like, oh no, I think it seems that it is this Greek thing because the Olympics is Greek, and this and that and the other, and then they do have these like references that you could say is possibly valid, but I do think after doing a bit of a deeper dive, I'd say it's likely more that they were trying to depict the Last Supper as a mockery, and I think there's some points to that in the apology, which we can go through in a minute.
Can I say, just on that point too, where people are saying, oh, there's a Greek connection, people need to understand there's things about this that don't make sense, though. Like, there's 4 traditional Greek gods associated with the Olympics and the Olympic mythology, and don't believe me, go and read the official Olympics website from Paris and read the 4 gods. And guess who's not listed there? Bacchus or Dionysus is not listed as one of them. The Olympic Committee, after the fact, a couple of days later, when they started this new narrative claiming that it was all about Dionysus and nothing else, they claimed that the imagery of Dionysus, you can still go and read the tweet, it's online, said that this is an example of how, it's not good for us to be at war with each other. No, the cult of Dionysus was actually about violence and sadism, and it was so violent and submersive. So I wasn't submersive. Well, that's not the right word, is it? So, what's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, I've drawn a blank. Culturally subversive, not submersive. That the Romans actually outlawed it at one point because it was of the violence and sadism and other things associated with it. So yeah, this is not really, and it's not like I've heard Greek commentators say, in actual fact, there isn't a tradition in Greece of associating Bacchus or Dionysus with the Olympics. So it is really more of a stretch that they've done here. And I think, again, if we consider the concept of art and we realize there wasn't just a depiction of the Last Supper inside a Dionysian orgy scene, which is loaded with context and imagery and symbolism in and of itself, before you even talk about the religious nature of what they've done here, a subversive cult feast of hedonism is presented to the world. That's loaded with implications all by itself. But also, it included other things as well. Like people who are saying, oh, no, it's just about the Greek stuff, aren't mentioning the fact that it also included a runway show, which has got nothing to do with either. It included a drag performer singing. It's got nothing to do with either. It was more than just one thing, and I think people need to understand that point.
Yeah, and I think that what everything you're saying was, it kind of goes into the conclusion that I've drawn of, if they were using the Greek god's feast,
Dionysian.
if they were using that, I don't think they were doing it accurately or even well. I think what they would have done is, let's put a few Greek things in there so then we can cover ourselves later. Because it like you said, it is so obviously the Last Supper. It is so obviously a mockery of that. And even if they're like, yeah, we'll just do the Last Supper with a few Greek touches, it's like, well, that in itself is a mockery. That's completely misinterpreting it. It's misunderstanding it. And I have to say, my first reaction to it was, without any, when I saw the blue person come out, I thought, oh, this is probably some eco person, and that's Mother Nature or some crap. I was like, regardless, it's still hitting that point of this. Even if they are saying, oh no, we were legitimately trying to do a Greek god thing, they did it so badly it was a mockery of the Last Supper. But then everything you've mentioned as well, there's too much evidence, there's too much decent analysis on this to disregard that fact.
Can I say too, this is how this can work, and people need to understand this. I'm not a student of art. I have two younger brothers who do have degrees in art, and I have another third younger brother who has a postgrad history degree and now teaches at a classical education college in Canada. And so it sort of seems to be something that sort of runs in the family. We were interested in this sort of aspect of life. And I have, some of your listeners might be familiar with the fact I have a long-standing YouTube channel, and I don't post as much now as I used to, but my passion was exploring symbolism and thematic symbolism in film and visual medium. And this is what you've got to think of this performance like. It is like a film. It's a moving image that contains within it a series of scenes. It's not just one thing. And there's multiple things going on here. And I'll give you a great metaphor, which I'm going to use in my podcast episode, that helps unpack and explain this, how this actually works, how you can have one thing and a completely different thing also in that same thing when it comes to this type of visual art. Imagine I said to you, I'm going to make a Western film. It is absolutely a Western, and it is influenced by the Western movies of Sergio Leone, the Dollars trilogy. I'm influenced by the Westerns of John Ford, and it's called A Death in Colorado Springs, and everyone's in period costumes, and it's set in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Everything there it's a Western, right? That's true. I am inspired by John Ford. I am inspired by the Western genre. I have created my own depiction of a Western. However, let's imagine that early on in that film, there is a scene involving a local ranch family who are sort of central to the plot of this particular Western. And it is a wedding feast. It's a wedding day for this family. The eldest daughter in the family is getting married. And the father of the family is sort of involved in local business and dodgy criminal activity as well. And he is quite well respected and feared in the local town. And he is also, this is an Italian family, and someone comes to him in this Western scene, and it's outside. It's not shot inside, it's shot outside. And they say, look, please, Don, can you grant me this one important favor? I'm being harassed and threatened. I need your help. And then the father says, yes, I will do this. On the day of my daughter's wedding, I will do this one favor for you, but you will return the favor for me. What's the first thing you're going to think of when you see that? You are going to think, that's The Godfather. That's Francis Ford Coppola. Now, it's true. That's exactly what that is there. Yeah. It is a mimicking of The Godfather. It's not an exact replica. It's a mimicking of it, but it's still also true that I wasn't inspired by Francis Ford Coppola when I made my performance, and that this is overall not a depiction of The Godfather. And I think that's a helpful metaphor maybe for people to think of what's going on here on that bridge in France.
Yeah, I think people get too caught up in the details of it, and I think nowadays we are in an era where we've been introduced to the critical method of thinking, and everyone thinks, oh, I can think my way around this, and we've got like social critical theory and all this stuff, which isn't great. It's maybe good as a way of exercising your brain, but it's been applied too strongly. And I think nowadays it's kind of in the mind of people that I can think my way through this. I can make this sound good. And you see it in art. It's like, I've got a white canvas, and this depicts this and this and this. It's like, no, you've done nothing. And I think we get a lot of that, and people can do that in even the good ways. It's like, oh, I can see how this could be another way, looked at it in a different light, and we can reason it this way, and therefore it probably is that then, when you're faced with something in reality which isn't any of that. And that's what we have here, is like, yes, there is a blue guy, and we can call him Dionysus, and all this, and there is a Greek reference, but if you look at everything else, and in fact, if you just look at, like you say, the imagery, immediately recognizable, we know what they're doing. You can't lie to us, and like it comes to a bit of gaslighting.
Well,
stuff.
Can I say too, some people who are, and these are good people I know, who have tried to defend it and have said, oh no, that doesn't look like the Last Supper because look, there's an extra 3 or 4 people on the edge of the frame there. So at that table scene that is a mimicking of the Last Supper, they're like, I can count 16 or 17 people. Again, this is art. It's not mechanical engineering replication. They're not replicating. In fact, everything about that scene looks totally different, but you draw from the symbolism and the iconography of something, and you include that, and that's the key bit. And so it's a depiction. It's not a replication, just like my example of the film. I haven't replicated the scene from The Godfather. It's not the same period. It's not the same costumes. It's not the same dialogue, but you know what it is straight away because of the key components are there and they are present and they are so strong and so powerful and evocative. You can see what it is straight away. And I think that some people are then sort of turning around and they're sort of trying to have their cake and eat it too. So they're saying, oh, look, I can count 16 or 17 people in that frame of the Last Supper, but then they completely ignore that traditionally Dionysus is not blue. They completely ignore the fact that they're not replicating a Feast of the Gods painting, a Dionysian orgy either. So you can't have it both ways. So it's like if you're going to use that as your standard, and I think part of this is what you're speaking to about, I guess the way we think about things is we live in a very mechanistic, material, naturalistic way of thinking about the world, but as Catholics, as Christians, our worldview is sacramental. And we understand the power of symbolism. For Christianity, up until very recently, really, we understood that symbols weren't just, today we think of symbols as pointing to something, but we understood simple symbols, and traditionally this is how it was understood, is they make real something. This is the sacramental nature. Like if you see me nodding off in this interview, that's an outward sign of an invisible reality, and it's also made real in the world. It's a very profound difference. And when you realize that, you realize, oh yeah, I can be seeing, or there can be more than, just one thing happening here, and it's not quite as simplistic and mechanistic as people want to make it. So, I see 16 people, that must discount the Last Supper iconography is being used. No, that's and it's certainly not how you think about art, and it's certainly not the way of thinking about symbolism and sacramentality, I'd argue. Yeah,
and also I think it's missing the point that mockery isn't an accurate imitation. It's a mockery. So it's going to be different. Like, 7's a perfect number, and then 6 is the mockery of that. It's less than that. It's different, and it's changed. And yeah, again, they're missing the point of, like, I think there's lots of points that people are missing. The fact that there is a massive drag show on an international thing that families are watching, and lots of issues regarding that.
Well, here's another one that I haven't heard many people talking about. They had 10 female statues arise from the river, one at a time as part of this opening ceremony. which is kind of interesting when you think about the political implications of sort of feminism. And there is a strong history in France of feminism. People like Simone de Beauvoir, who was one of the statues. And so it's not surprising. But again, this is politically loaded. And it's kind of ironic now when you think about what's going on today with the controversy in women's boxing at these Olympics. But what's interesting is that 3 out of the 10 female statues, well, in fact, only 1 of the 10 female statues was involved in sports. The other 9 have got nothing to do with sports. Of the other 9, 3 of those females were involved in pro-abortion activism. They're known for being involved in that. And there was a 4th female who was an anarchist who promoted class warfare and acts of political violence. So this whole thing is like quite clearly in the home, of course, too, of France, post-Enlightenment, post-French Revolution France. It is the home of religious subversion and mockery targeted directly at Christianity. And it is their culture has been steeped in it for generations now since that evil event. And so, you just like, I really struggle to accept that, this all just happens to be purely coincidental given all of what was going on here.
Yeah, there's the point of how much money is spent on it, and they didn't just throw this together last minute. This has been in the works and been planned for years and years, and they've been doing up the city to make sure that it's prepared. They haven't just thrown this together last minute. There's too many points to consider to make these think this is not the Last Supper. It definitely is, and yeah, I think on
that point, even the framing of the camera angle. Why would you have, and they knew where the camera was, they were looking to camera, they'd clearly rehearsed this. Why would the camera be framing it up that way? Why would they be looking to camera knowing where it was? They'd clearly rehearsed all of that. That's, again, wow, what a coincidence. Purely coincidental. I'm sorry. No.
Yeah, because one of the arguments I've heard is like people are saying, oh yeah, but the people that were performing have even said it was the Last Supper, and then the argument against that's like, yeah, but they're not the artist. And like, again, going back to your movie reference, if someone is... the Snow White movie that was done recently that I think has been axed. I don't know what happened to that in the end. The thing that brought that to bear was the fact that the actress was saying the ideology. It was put into her throughout the whole movie, this is what we're doing. And so you're not going to say to these performers, like, no, this is definitely the Dionysian feast. It's not the Last Supper. And then she's going, no, I think it's the Last Supper. I'm going to say it's the Last Supper.
Well, that you've made a great point there. I've been thinking about this, actually. I'm going to talk about this in my podcast episode too. Anyone who's even done high school theatre will tell you the absurdity of that. They would have spent, this is much bigger and more important than that. They would have spent weeks and weeks intensely practicing and months leading up to this, preparing and practicing for this. To suggest that these people who have been working with this director suddenly came up with this idea on their own, this connection, I'm sorry, or even people turning around saying, it doesn't mean anything, they were just the performers. Mate, they've been with this artistic director for months preparing for this very event. It's actually more likely that they have heard him at the very least say things like, think of the Last Supper. There's also something interesting, by the way, that I've heard not many people talking about, actually, but I think it is interesting, and it's the concept, it's big in the gay world of what they call voguing. And it was a dance craze that actually came out of Harlem in America, really took off in the 70s. And voguing is literally named after Vogue magazine, and it's big in drag pageantry and drag spectacles and drag shows. And what they do is they literally strike poses. Like, that's voguing, that kind of thing. And you actually do see them doing this earlier on, or at one point when they're doing the runway show as well. And there has been some queer commentary that I've seen indicating that scene might have actually been voguing, which would kind of make sense, where they're sort of striking the Last Supper poses. And now I can't prove that, but that is a really fascinating and interesting possibility that's possibly what they've done.
Yeah.
And so you strike, and one of the things about voguing was they drew inspiration from things like Egyptian art and culturally well-known poses to subvert them. And the whole idea with voguing was the sort of whole idea of your gender is a pantomime, and so you pantomime these scenes. And so that's an interesting piece of commentary, I think, that may well explain possibly what we saw there.
And I think, like, going back to that comment people are making is like, there were 17 people and it was this whole sort of thing. The clips that I see, there is definitely one point where they all move into one position and then move out of it. And that fits the world we live in. Something I heard on the internet recently is the amount of young women having plastic surgery, having Botox is increased. And alongside an interesting statistic that people are like spending, when you look at screen time, 8 hours on the phone, 6 hours of sleep. They don't live in the real world. And people saying, why are these people getting this plastic surgery and this Botox? It doesn't look good in real life. It's because they're not doing it for real life. They're doing it for a 25th of a second shot of a camera that they're going to post online. And that's exactly what, this is what happened. They did a little pose, stop, and carry on. And then that was the image that they were trying to put. So, they were sneaking it in. I mean, that's my own speculation, but it definitely, when I first watched it, it did seem they were getting into a pose and then they moved out of it rather than it was just chaos going around and someone screenshot a part of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not like you have to be. This was so obviously recognizable that everyone, like I said, almost everyone said that's the Last Supper because they saw the key iconography present in that. And you're right, that to say, that's just, the camera just happened to be in the right place. And they were all looking at the camera for some strange reason. And you've got a center performer, DJ Barbara Butch, who's someone who not once, but twice in 2 different social media posts linked this to Christ's Last Supper. In one post, she put the side-by-side image that's really well known that she subsequently was clearly told to take down, which says, oh yes, the New Gay Testament. Remember, and she's got the images side by side or one on top of the other to show you. She also had another post where it listed a lineup of what was happening in the performance. And at the top, it had Barbara Butch as Olympic Jesus. So she called herself that. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? Oh, wow, she's such an ignoramus. She had no idea what was going on. She's literally standing in the middle of the frame where Christ would be, and she's doing this.
Yeah.
Now, that's clearly a political symbol, but you know what else it is? If you are a Christian or a Catholic with a liturgical tradition, you will say, I think there is a type of artistic subversion of the elevation of the host going on there. Now, I could be reading too much into that, but that's exactly how art works. Thomas Joly is a guy who's well schooled in art. He's known for breaking the boundaries. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize this because I've done a bit more research. But when he was appointed 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago, I think it was, to be the artistic director for the opening ceremony, there was controversy in France. There were people who said this was a controversial choice, and they didn't. They thought he was just push the boundaries and stuff like this. And so clearly that indicates that this man is someone who's got pedigree, who understands, and we've got images of him in other places using Christian iconography in a subversive artistic way. Yeah, I think clearly there's a whole backstory here that people aren't really considering.
Yeah, before we talk this to death, I just want to move on to the apology, or the masterpiece of woke duplicity, as Bishop Barron calls it. There's a few quotes that I got from it, and you could, so from those, it's like, when I initially read that, it's like, oh yeah, this is so, makes it so obvious that what they were trying to do was to depict the Last Supper because they view the Catholic Church as a thing that is, I feel like the woke agenda they give the Catholic Church way too much power. It's like, oh yeah, we're in charge of how people think. But yeah, so they were saying, I'm going to tackle these ideas.
Can I say that, Dom, just on that point, like I said earlier, people have got to remember this is France as well. This is a French performance in France, and the Catholic Church was they had these festivals of reason after the French Revolution, where they went into Notre Dame Cathedral, stripped the altars, and had people putting on pantomimes of the Greek gods. So yeah, there's a whole history back here that people possibly aren't aware of, and that's why, in this case, it really does lend weight to who they've targeted.
That one fact there, I think that's all you need to know to see, all right, they're doing it again. But yeah, so I feel like the points that were made, I'm going to read like 3 quotes that we can talk about, and I feel like it's hitting that thing is like, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a symbol of the Catholic Church and I'm going to tear that down because that's how I'm going to tackle these ideas. And so, but you could also argue that it's like, oh, that's maybe why he put Dionysus in it, because he could maybe loosely, again, if you look into Dionysus, you probably disagree in any depth, but on the surface level, you could maybe argue it. Anyway, so the first quote is, This is the artist himself saying, there were Republican ideas, inclusive ideas, ideas of kindness, ideas of generosity, ideas of solidarity. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, so this is just what everyone thinks they're talking about. But also at the same time, in trying to do these things and using his words, he's actually doing the opposite. So he thought, Republican ideas, so it's, taking a more conservative end. It's like, I'm reaching all things, but by doing that, I'm not doing any of it.
Can I say people need to understand, again, this is the French context. If you understand a bit of history, I'm an amateur history buff who is constantly, I'm malnourished historically, but I'm constantly trying to feed myself by reading great and important books on history. And if you understand French history, when he says Republican ideals, maybe Americans think, Republican Party. That's not what he's saying. He is meaning French Revolutionary, Enlightenment, and they deliberately and directly targeted their full rage at the Catholic Church. And you're right, there's so much wrapped up in that one statement alone that people possibly have missed. In France, that has a very specific context, and that does include the whole, the whole notion of how you treat religion in general.
Yeah, and like you say, it's going back to going back to the French history and everything. And I suppose that is what you're trying to do. If your country is hosting the Olympics, you want to talk about your history. I remember when it was held in the UK, in England, I was like, this is brilliant. I can relate to all of this. But it's going back to the bad history. It's going back to the history where they strip down the Notre Dame Cathedral and do acts of the Greek gods. But those ideas of inclusivity, kindness, generosity, and solidarity, I feel like those words have been ruined in modern era, and we see how they've been ruined specifically in this performance. And I feel like it points out, it's like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm going to take down the Catholic Church with these words. Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I think part of that is him just trying to defend his position, but it also isn't really consistent. Like if you're talking about Republican ideals in the French sense, and then you're trying to say inclusivity and tolerance, well, I would say, hold on, that is a bit disingenuous when you look at the history of what this republic was founded on and the reign of terror. And like when you are torturing the children of Marie Antoinette to try and get them to accuse their mother, and then you just bring her out on a cart and throw cabbages and rotten fruit at her and then guillotine her in public, and then you carry on guillotining people right up until the point where you guillotine a whole lot of Catholic nuns, Carmelite nuns. You can't then turn around and say, it's solidarity and it's tolerance. No, that's not how this started. And they are not, like, in fact, in France, remember the Charlie Hebdo scandal with the Islamic cartoons? It wasn't just that they were discussing ideas about Muhammad or they depicted Muhammad. It was a deliberately provocative, offensive, and childish pornographic depiction of Muhammad. And the French celebrated that. And they called it a right. And you see, it's quite, when you say there's not quite an honest consistency, if you like, going on here when you frame it in that way.
Yeah, because he also goes on to say, and this line just kind of cracked me up a bit. It's like he talks about rights they have in France, and he says, in France we're allowed to love who we want, how we want. We can believe or not believe, and then goes on to say something about we have lots of different rights. And I was like, what does that even mean? You're allowed to love who you want, how you want. There, even outside of like a Christian context, there's rules. You can't just do whatever you want, however you want, to whoever you want. And the believe or not believe thing, it's like it just seems so vapid. It seems like,
well, can I say I've picked up on that point, that specific statement where he talks about we have the right to believe or not to believe. To me, that does not make sense if this is just a Dionysian orgy that he's depicting. Because why would you make that statement? To me, that statement only really makes sense as if he knows that he has actually taken someone else's beliefs, their sacred imagery, and utilized them in some way in his production. No one is worshipping the Greek cult of Dionysus in France anymore. So there's no debate about, do I have a right to worship Dionysus? No one. But you know what people are talking about? Christianity. And I suspect, because that statement was made on day one, right? And it was about 12 hours later that the new version of events started coming out, and they tried to shift the narrative and the focus onto the Greek Dionysian orgy part of it. But initially, when you're making statements like that, that to me sounds like you actually know that you have made some kind of statement involving Christianity, and you're saying, hey, look, I'm free, you're free to believe, but I'm also free to not believe, and in France, also to ridicule beliefs I don't like, because they are free to, they celebrate that idea, like Charlie Hebdo, I said. So that seems to be actually a kind of tacit pointing to the fact that he did understand, and he was trying to defend, because that's clearly what they seem to do initially, sort of tried to lean in a little bit, and they you're right, they used the buzzwords and it's tolerance and inclusivity, but they didn't deny outright what was going on. That sort of attempt to reframe it came later when the controversy just kept exploding.
Yeah, and I think we have a problem nowadays where we've kind of become too literal, and it might be like the Enlightenment and science and empirical observation that's like ruined our brains a bit, but it's like, yeah, but they didn't actually say that they did the actual thing, and we're forgetting the reality of things like art and philosophy and poetry, where you don't say the thing, but it's obvious that you mean the thing. Like the tearing down of that famous Christmas song is like, oh, it sounds a bit rapey. It's like, no, that's how you play. That's how romance happens. You're suggestive. You say, oh, I don't want to go, but I do want to stay. And
it's from a specific film, by the way, which is a great comedy I've got in my collection. And when you understand that, you realize, oh, there's a whole context I've missed.
Yeah.
But that point you're making, I think, is a valid one. And it's kind of, again, people are having their cake and eating it too. They're like, well, they didn't explicitly say that they used it, but they also didn't explicitly deny that there was the presence of that imagery either. They have said, I was inspired by Dionysus. That's just like me saying, I was inspired by John Ford and I'm inspired by Westerns. That's true. But it's also true that I've got a godfather mimicking in my film as well. You see that, and that's how you can have both and going on at once. And I really think people need to, the sort of the strange, you're right, it's a strange literalism, isn't it? Where they sort of are mining what they want to see. And again, that might be good for engineering, but it's not how art and symbolism works, especially someone who's trained in subversive art.
Yeah, and when you remember, again, it's just a human reality that our words aren't enough, so we use imagery, we use analogy and metaphor to make a point, and that's the biggest argument I've seen for this being the Greek gods and not the Christian imagery is, but it wasn't literally that, was it? And it's just missing the point completely and it's not existing in reality, I don't think.
Well, it's not literally the Greek gods either. Like, I've gone and I went and looked at a website that was, now this has got nothing to do with this controversy. It's an art history website that curated years ago, well before this was even a thing, they curated images in this article of Dionysian orgies, the feast of the gods, depictions of Bacchus, the Bacchanalia, the Bacchanalises, all these different names for it, the feast. And guess what? You don't see. The consistent traditional depiction of Dionysus does not look like the Smurf guy. Like you thought that was a sort of environmental thing. It doesn't look like that. So it's clearly not a literal depiction of that either. It is. This is the thing. It's not a replication. It's artistic depiction. It's license. That's what art is. And I really think you can't say on the one hand, well, it's not literally, because it's also not literally that other thing either, So, yeah.
Well, also, art isn't literal. And, like, one thing that I think's kind of ironic is, like, in contemporary times, Christian art is often thought as being cheesy and kind of rubbish. And it's often because they're trying to make a point too much that they forget to make it sound good, or they forget to make it look good. They're trying to make a point too much, and now that's become a secular thing. Let's try and make this point, and we'll do it in our own way. And they're just, art seems to be a thing of the past. I mean, obviously in Christian circles we started with the art and we created beautiful art, and then it kind of, I don't know, we became too focused on the message and not enough on the looks of it. But now the secular world has followed that train, but it seems that way.
Well, I think in Christianity, we lost touch with the sacramental worldview. We get pulled into the age of materialism and empiricism and Francis Bacon's era and that. And I think that does have an influence, you're right. And the sacramental worldview, like you see it in the church fathers and in mysticism, there's this deep, like they don't just read the scriptures and go, oh yeah, X, Y, Z. They see the deeper symbolism behind what's going on. They read Christ in the Old Testament, as they rightly should, and we all should. And you know what I mean? It's powerful. It's deep, and it brings everything to life. It's very real and transformative. And we've sort of lost touch with that. So our art, I think, often reflects that. And also, you're right, the desire to push the message becomes more important than the actual art itself. And I think in general, what initially happened was you do have subversive artists who are trained under the sacramental worldview, even outside of the church, and you see them subverting even Christian imagery hundreds of years ago. But then what happens is, as the culture degrades, the training of artists degrades along with it, and you get to the point now whereby you just have this, and woke is the right word, the woke destruction of storytelling. We can't tell good myths, the small stories, because we no longer have a coherent, what the postmodernists would call meta-narrative, the big story that explains everything. We've lost touch with it, so we can't tell little stories well. And that's what they have. That's what's ended up in films and television. And then what happens is it just becomes a vehicle for propaganda or ideological doctrines. So you must have a certain number of people who meet a certain quota, seen on screen, and that's more important because you don't know what else to do. Basically, it's like someone handing you some. I don't know, but like being in a football game and someone's, you're like, throw me the ball, and they throw you the ball, and then you're like, oh, what do I do now with it? And so they've been handed the ball, but they just don't know what to do with it, so they just fall back on the ideological doctrines and practices of diversity and quotas and stuff like that. Yeah,
and I think I don't know there's much to say on it. Like, there was a woman there at the apology, and she mentioned that we were just trying to celebrate community tolerance, and Bishop Barron comes back at this very easy and say, oh yeah, apart from the 2.6 billion Christians on earth, you're not going to tolerate them. And I think it just fits into the whole taking over of the language. We're going to use this word because we want it to mean this thing, and it just ruins the meaning of the word and anything that you do with it.
Again, if you're celebrating tolerance, why would you include a feast, a Dionysian feast? A Dionysian orgy feast is not associated with tolerance. They were culturally subversive. This cult has histories attached to it of awful violent, sadistic practices. And again, they were so serious that the pagans even, at one point, the pagan Roman Senate suppressed them. And they drew up statutes to suppress them because they considered them to be a danger. And then how can you also, let's just leave out the religious imagery. Let's just play along with the narrative and pretend, no, your lying eyes are lying to you and what you saw. There was not any depiction whatsoever of the Last Supper at any moment in that whole thing. Tell me how this display is tolerant of traditional family-focused cultures in Asia and Africa and the Middle East. You tell me that they looked at that and said, oh yes, I see human fraternity, I see natural law, traditional human, universal values of the common good in that? No, there's no way they saw that. They just didn't. I think that is very disingenuous.
Yeah, and then you just get into the, what do you mean by tolerance? I remember Bishop Barron talking about how people were talking about tolerance. It's like, why would you want to be tolerated? Tolerance means I don't like you, but you'll do. But what they're trying to, it seems what they're trying to say is that I'm going to include everybody. But if you include everybody, you've got nothing. If you have everything, if you're a British person, you're a British person with British values, and so you can't also be an African. You can't you can say come in and you can be African, but we're British and this is how we do things. Or in this case, France or whatever, that tolerance in the way that they may be trying to interpret of we're just going to include everything. And you could say, okay, they're including Greek mythology in with Christian imagery. And it's like, well, that's not tolerance. That's just ruining everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is what it is it's a co-opting and a hijacking. And ironically, this is the subversive nature of the trans ideology anyway. I honestly, I can't believe people are not sort of seeing what it's just, it seems to me to be so obvious. And maybe it's just because I'm so used to thinking about symbolism and thematic elements of symbolism. It's like, yeah, of course you would use Last Supper references when you are about to subvert the Last Supper of Christ by turning it into a pagan subversive cult orgy, right? And so of course you'd do that. And of course you would use that imagery of transubstantiation, because your whole belief is that there is a transformation of the person that can occur at a gender level. Like it's like if you're a subversive artist, you're seeing this, you're thinking this way. And yeah, it's sort of, again, I think it is, you're right. People just have this literalistic, materialistic. But can I just, as a sort of, I don't want to say a segue, but an example of an Olympics opening ceremony that did do this well, that did something impressive, beautiful, drew on Greek mythology, and also just everyone could look at it and go, yeah, they were drawn into it. Didn't matter where you were in the world or who you were, was the opening of the Greeks, the actual Greek Olympics, 2006, I think they were. And you can still watch the footage online. Just Google opening ceremony with statues at Greek Olympics. And they had these people dressed up all in like that, like a sort of ashy white color, like your Greek statue would be. And they were all made up, and they had the hair and everything, and the face, everything was perfect. They looked like human versions of Greek statues. And then they were all striking and engaged in different poses to do with Greek mythology and the Olympics. And like one of them, they bring them past on like a train. And there's like 4 guys who are on the special device. They're obviously hooked into it. You can't see the device, but you can see them, and they are just running as this thing is dragged along. It's just amazing. And it was awesome, and it was fraternity, and it was universal, and it was beautiful. And you compare that to what happened at France.
Yeah.
No, it was a whole nother level. Like this one's up here, and France is like way down here somewhere,
Okay, so to bring this to an end, I guess the question we have now is, how do we react to this as Catholics? As there's a lot of confusion out there. I couldn't really think of something that would be powerful publicly. There's lots of people that are writing letters and complaining, and I think that's a good place to start. But I guess from their perspective, they've already done the apology. So if you're just complaining now it's just noise. So that would just be annoying rather than effective. But I think there is a argument to tackle this on not just a kind of public level, but also on a spiritual level. So have you got any insight or thoughts into that?
Well, yeah, I'd say a few things. Number one, I'd say first and foremost, I would say don't judge other people harshly for their reactions. Everyone is going to react differently. And I think as long as someone's not insulting you, like some people might just say, okay, I'm really wounded by this, just like there would be if someone debased a member of their family for everyone in public to see. The right reaction is sadness. It is to condemn what's going on. That's not unreasonable. So any Christian saying that's unreasonable, I think they're being unreasonable, actually. So if this happened to your loved one, of course, if you love them, then what are you going to do? You're going to feel upset on their behalf. You're going to say, hey, don't talk about my wife that way, or don't talk about my husband or my daughter or my son, whatever. You're going to actually step up and do that. But also some people might not have, they might say, okay, I am wounded. I see the offense of this. I'm not buying into the sort of this questionable narrative that's been put forward to try and just dismiss what's going on here. But I'm not going to get publicly raucous. I'm not going to go on social media. I'm just going to go away quietly and pray for these people. That's a beautiful reaction. But it's different to other people. Some people will speak up, some people won't. And vice versa. If you see someone really loudly speaking up, as long as they're not being uncharitable, don't judge them unfairly for that. They clearly have been wounded by what they've seen. And I would suggest in most cases, these people are genuine. They have a love of Christ and of sacred things of our Christian tradition as disciples of Christ. That really they're wounded by this. And so, that's not unnatural. But I think also we do need to recognize, I think, a couple of things. One is we charity in all things. I'm going to say this on the podcast today. I'm going to try and make this my last public word, if at all possible, on this. And it's a really big, comprehensive, evidence-based court case style approach, but that's it. Because I don't want this to sow unnecessary division, and I don't want to consume my valuable God-given oxygen that he's given me for other things as well. I don't want to spend too much time on it, so be aware of that. I think also we need to have humility. Some people are accusing their fellow Christians of they're just in some sort of cognitive bias here, and they're only seeing what they want to see, and they're dismissing all the other evidence, and they're locked into this idea and they won't let it go. I'm someone who over the past week since this happened has gone back and forth, looked and thought, maybe I have got this wrong, and looked at the evidence and considered it and thought deeply about it. And so I'm not someone who's just locked into a position. But if, let's say next week, just compelling overwhelming, irrefutable proof was just produced. It was just so clear. I'm not sure what that would look like, but let's say it was so clear that that's not what happened, and it was just one big mistake in identity. I would be first to say, look, I was wrong about this. And I think we've got to have humility in all things, including to that degree. Now, I don't think that will happen. I think the reason why they've pulled the footage and we get these half-hearted apologies and they're trying to now kill this controversy is because there are big implications. You've had at least 2 nations that I'm aware of who have laid official complaints. Iran laid an official complaint. The island of Malta laid an official complaint. There are athletes within the village who said they were quite disturbed by what they saw and they were struggling to sleep. So this has created a lot of problems for them. On top of an Olympic ceremony where they made other big mistakes. They misnamed in the actual written program and in how they delivered it, they misnamed South Korea. They called them North Korea. South Korea laid an official diplomatic complaint. That's quite a serious thing. They hung the flag upside down, the Olympic flag. There's all this stuff. And then you've got these controversies with the boxers, the dirty river. There's a whole lot of pressure on them that's all going on. And also, Article 50, Clause number 2, it's only got, I think, 2 clauses in it, of the Olympic Charter says that you're actually not allowed to make religious displays or political protests or political statements anywhere at the Olympics, and apparently they're really serious about this. So I have a feeling they're like, oh my gosh, this can be seen as actually falling into that category, and this could have big ramifications. Get rid of it, kill this thing, try and shut it down as quickly as we can. But let's say there was some irrefutable proof that we were all wrong, then be humble. And so have that level of humility, even if you are confident in your position, have that humility as well. You know, knowing the truth doesn't mean that we've got license now to go, oh, you're an idiot, you're a fool, look at me. No, pride is just the greatest sin, right? Don't fall into that. And then I would say also, turn this thing around. Don't let this be an opportunity for shouting and rage and division. Use it as a call to prayer. And we've been doing this in our family home, actually, for the last few nights. Pray for Thomas Joly. I've read articles which indicate that he was baptized as a Catholic. Pray for that man. Pray for his conversion. Pray for his healing, the brokenness and the woundedness. Pray for Barbara Butch. Pray for everybody else. And I mean this in a genuine, serious, loving way. Not weaponized prayer, but genuine prayer out of love for these people. Because wouldn't it be amazing if we all got to see them in heaven? That would be phenomenal. If we all got to hear about one day their story of how Christ transformed their lives, that would be such a beautiful thing. And so, yeah, I'd pray for them. And then I'd say also think about your own life. Like, if you want to make the world better, start proactively working against hedonism in your own life. Do things that actually require sacrifice of you on a regular daily basis. Show love to others even when it hurts to do that. Do things that require sacrifice and suffering, like go to the gym if you're not doing that. These are little natural ways to push back against hedonism and also to foster that Christian culture of self-giving love. So your life, as I've said somewhere else publicly, looks like the self-giving love of Christ's Last Supper and not the self-gratifying hedonism of the Bacchanalian, Dionysian orgy. And I think, doing those things, that's how we, I think, improve and make a difference. Otherwise, the danger is you're just screaming at the moon and you're just yelling at the darkness, but not doing anything, as the old saying goes, to light candles in the midst of that darkness.
I think that's really beautiful, and I think because the thing I struggle with that is the humble way is the right way, and the way to pray about this is to sit down in front of the Eucharist and be quiet, and that kind of, I feel like I'm like, yeah, that's right. Oh, it's really tough. I kind of want to say something. I want to see some vengeance and some justice done to these people for doing something so awful. But I think, that idea of, again, turning into like, actually, no, my Father in heaven's been hurt, and that upsets me because it's my father, not because it's some political ideology, not because it's some religion. It's because of the person of Christ was made to be something he's not, and is misunderstood and mocked, and that makes me upset. And I feel like on a day-to-day basis there's no way of letting that out, because maybe the secular world doesn't care, they don't notice, they're like, oh yeah, that happened, who cares, I don't really like religion anyway, and so you're upset and nobody cares. But I think, one thing, and I'm going to have a podcast later in the week with Deacon Harold about this. We had the Eucharistic Congress recently, And I felt like that was such a shining light, and this was such a, well, in comparison, feels like a blip on the radar, but it feels like it's been made to be such a dark thing that, like, I think the Eucharistic Congress is the answer. Let's create our own unifying events around the Eucharist, and it starts.
Can I say 3 things about that?
You can,
because I think that is a great point, and that's a beautiful thought, Dominic. Because I think 3 things strike me. Number one, straight away. Number one is the difference between what is the difference at a Eucharistic Congress? It's not about us. It's not self-gratification. It's not self-seeking. It's not self-serving. The focus is not on us. We look to Christ. We look beyond ourselves. And that's a massive difference straight away with what we saw. And then also, I think 2 other interesting things. It is interesting that right on the back of this very big Eucharistic Congress across the nation of America, a very large nation in both stature and size, globally speaking, that right on the back of that, we get this particular event happening on the global stage. And if I'm a man of faith who, believes that there's a bit more than coincidence happening in the world and that there are spiritual powers that do seek to undermine that which is good, true and beautiful, then the more that the church is united in the right way, the more the enemy and the bigger the attacks will be. And then lastly, you possibly have seen the footage that the day after, I think it might have even been the night after the performance, Paris was thrown into darkness because the power failed. And what a symbolic moment that was. But the one place that still had the lights blaring was the Christian Basilica, and you could see it clearly. It was just this stark, beautiful moment. It's almost as if God was saying, hey, I'm still the light. Without me, there is a privation of good. There is nothing. There is darkness. So don't fixate on the darkness. Fixate on me and bring me into the darkness.
And that basilica is called Sacré-Cœur, which I think is the Sacred Heart. And that just brings you right. That tells you right where to focus.
Do you know what else is important about that place? Because my wife, Katie, she was over there last year. She went to Mass there. And she read up about the cathedral when they were there. They've got these signs up. That has had Eucharistic adoration of Christ 24/7 in that building for over 100 years. They've never missed an hour. Right through the bombing of World War II, right through COVID, it still went on. And that was the one basilica that is lit up. The very sort of heart of adoration of Christ and the Blessed Sacrament that is given to us through the Last Supper, and that's the place that's lit up. As I said, I'm a man who knows there is coincidence in the world, but I'm also a man who knows that there's more than coincidence going on in the world.
Yeah, and if that doesn't tell you what you need to do in regards to this situation, I don't know what else to say. It seems that we've talked it to death, and it seems quite clear that this was kind of malicious. It was a malicious attack on the Christianity, and it was not good. And what we need to do is we need to move forward. And I was inspired when we saw the Fijians singing, and it's like, look what, like, we were just attacked by the devil, and you know what that did to us? Nothing. We're still singing. The heart of Christ is still there. The Eucharist is still there. And I think that's the best response, is to just keep singing his praises in the face of utter humility and derision. And I just think it's so beautiful. Any last words and details on what you're working on at the moment?
Well, yeah, good question. I would just say to people again, just that reminder: humility, humility, humility. And also, don't allow it to rob you of your peace. That the devil would love that. He would absolutely love that. If he could take your love of Christ and your sadness about what's happened and turn it into a robbery of the gift of the Holy Spirit of peace in your life like that, yeah, he's won on all levels there. So don't allow it to consume you too much, and walk away. Do the good, true, and beautiful things that we need to do as disciples of Christ on a daily level. And just on a practical level, while I'm busy, I'm speaking. I don't know when this podcast goes out, but I'm in Palmerston North, the public event on Friday, next Friday. We've got the Activate Pro-Life Training Week coming up. There's still a couple of spaces there. That's in Auckland at the end of August. ActivateNZ.org if you're interested. There's just so much on. And other than that, God is good. I'm grateful for every good gift he's given me. And please, God, I would really love to see Thomas Joly and all of these other people experience the profound love of Christ and repentance and mercy in their lives. That would be amazing. I'd just be over the moon with it.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Curiously Catholic. And if you want to get involved with what we're doing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, evangelion.co.nz. Like, share, and subscribe. And also check out Brendan's stuff, his Activate program, his podcast. We'll put all the links below. So thanks for joining us, and God bless. All right. See you later, Brendan. Have a good day.
Bless you, bro. Too easy.
All right. God bless. See ya.
See you, mate. Bye-bye.